Before we proceed, we'll see how the ICD worked through the years. The ICD 1 came into being in 1893, which was called International List of Causes of Death. Then 1909, ICD 2 came, which was called International List of Causes of Sickness and Death. In 1929, ICD 4 came, which was called Categories Based on Etiology. In 1948, ICD 6 came, which was International Classification of Diseases, Injuries and Causes of Death, Mental, Psychoneurotic and Personality Disorders. Then 1975, ICD-9, narrative descriptions of mental and behavioral disorders. In 1990, ICD-10 came into being, and ICD-11 in 2018. Similarly, for DSM, the APA, American Psychiatric Association, first published the predecessor DSM in 1844. After World War II, DSM-1 was published in 1952 along with ICD-6. Then DSM-2 in 1968, DSM-3 in 1980, DSM-4 in 1994, and DSM-5 in 2000. So why the change? The development of the mental, behavioral, or neurodevelopmental disorders chapter of the ICD-11 was the largest and the most participative process in the history of mental health disorder classification. The three major aims for this process were global applicability, scientific validity, clinical utility, or reliability. So what is validity? It is the ability of a diagnostic system to describe accurately the person or phenomena it is delineating. And reliability, it means that a diagnostic system be constructed in such a fashion that different interviewers who interview the same patient will arrive at the same diagnosis in a timely fashion. So the groups tasked with revising DSM and ICD systems shared the goal of harmonizing the classifications as much as possible for the following reasons. The existence of two major classifications hinders collection and use of national health statistics, the design of clinical trials aimed at developing new treatments, and the consideration of global applicability of the results by international agencies. The existence of two classifications complicates the attempts to replicate scientific results across national boundaries. And even when the intention was to identify identical patient populations, DSM and ICD did not always agree. So the use of a shared framework helped to integrate the work of DSM and ICD work groups and to focus on scientific issues. The DSM-5 structure and proposed linear structure of ICD-11 have been endorsed by the leadership of the National Institute of Mental Health Research Domain Criteria Project. So what is RDoC? The RDoC is a research framework for the investigation of mental disorders that is not intended for immediate practical clinical use. The aim of RDoC is to provide a biologically informed framework for understanding mental disorders. The RDoC matrix distinguishes 6 domains of functioning: negative valence systems, positive valence systems, cognitive systems, social processes, arousal and regulatory systems, and sensory motor systems, with various subconstructs and 8 units of analysis: genes, molecules, cells, circuits, physiology, behavior, self-report, and paradigms. However, there is one major limitation that the RDoC matrix is too complex to guide diagnosis in clinical practice. So neither the structure of the ICD-11 nor the structure of DSM-5 are based on neurobiology. The large degree of biological heterogeneity within the diagnostic categories of current classification and difficulties distinguishing some diagnostic categories genetically and neurobiologically, different approaches have been proposed to shift diagnostic boundaries in a way that biologically more homogeneous subgroups can be formed. So to reconcile the needs of different user groups and to avoid chaos among different psychiatrists, eventually these systems were harmonized. So we'll overview some major disorders and the changes between ICD-10 and 11 and DSM-5. First is schizophrenia. The ICD-11 have replaced subtypes of schizophrenia with dimensional classification. The structure proposed for ICD-11 block on schizophrenia spectrum and other primary psychotic disorders includes schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, acute and transient psychotic disorders, schizotypal disorder, delusional disorders, and other primary psychotic disorders. So as we all know, the ICD-10 criteria for schizophrenia, we need at least 1 from A to D and 2 from E to H. For DSM-5, 2 or more should be present for at least 1 month, and out of 1 should be from delusions, hallucinations, or disorganized speech. And in ICD-11, there should be disturbances in thinking, perception, self-experience, cognition, volition, affect, and behavior. And the symptoms should be present for at least 1 month. So the name of chapter in ICD-10 is schizophrenia, schizotypal, and delusional disorders. In DSM-5, it is schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders. And in ICD-11, it is schizophrenia and other primary psychotic disorders. Duration of psychotic symptoms is 1 month for both ICD-10 and ICD-11 and 6 months for DSM-5. Functionality criteria is not included in ICD-10, whereas in DSM-5, It includes that functioning at work, interpersonal or self-care level is below the premorbid level. The subtypes have been removed from DSM-5 and ICD-11. ICD-10 does not include a symptom specifier, whereas in DSM-5, there are hallucinations, delusions, disorganized course, abnormal psychomotor behavior, negative symptoms, cognitive impairment, depression, and mania. In ICD-11, there are positive symptoms, negative symptoms, depressive symptoms, manic symptoms, psychomotor symptoms, and cognitive impairments. And cognitive damage criteria is not included in ICD-10, whereas it is included in DSM-5 and ICD-11. And the course specifies in ICD-10, it can be continuous, episodic with progressive deficit, episodic with stable deficit, episodic remittent, incomplete remission, complete remission, and other uncertain course. In ICD and DSM-5, it is first episode currently in acute episode, first episode in partial remission, first episode in full remission, multiple episodes in acute, multiple episodes in partial and full remission, and continuous unspecified. And in ICD-11, they are first currently symptomatic episode, first episode in partial remission and full remission and unspecified, multiple episodes currently symptomatic in partial remission and full remission and unspecified, and continuous in partial remission, full remission, or unspecified. Now, bipolar disorder, the ICD-11 requires the presence of the entry-level symptom of increased activity or subjective experience of increased energy, in addition to euphoria, irritability, or expansiveness. The presence of a mixed episode indicates a bipolar type 1 disorder. So the name of chapter in ICD-10 is bipolar affective disorder, and DSM-5 and 11 is bipolar and related disorders. So the criteria for ICD-10 is current episode should be manic, hypomanic, or depressive, with at least one affective episodes in the past, manic, hypomanic, mixed, or depressive. In DSM-5, it requires a single episode of mania. In ICD-11, there should be an occurrence of manic, mixed, or hypomanic episode or symptoms, typically alternating with depressive episodes or symptoms. There are no subtypes in ICD-10, whereas in DSM-5 and ICD-11, there are two subtypes of bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. Duration is 1 week for all three of them. And in DSM-5, the duration can be less than 1 week if hospitalization is necessary. And specifiers include bipolar affective disorder, current episode hypomanic, with manic without psychotic symptoms, manic with psychotic symptoms, mild or moderate depression, severe depression without psychotic symptoms, severe depression with psychotic symptoms, current episode mixed or in remission, or other bipolar affective disorders. In DSM-5, the specifiers are with anxious distress, with mixed features, with rapid cycling, with melancholic features, with atypical features, with mood congruent psychotic features, with mood incongruent psychotic features, with catatonia, with peripartum onset and seasonal pattern. And in ICD-11, they are more or less similar to ICD-10 with both for bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 disorders. Now, depressive disorders. The ICD-11 organizes depressive symptoms into three clusters: affective, cognitive, and neurovegetative. Significant changes made to the diagnostic guidelines for depression include the omission of reduced energy and fatigue from the three major criteria, and their inclusion in a neurovegetative cluster, and they're no longer considered sufficient as an entry-level symptom. Either almost daily depressed mood or diminished interest in activities lasting at least 2 weeks is required, and threshold of 5 symptoms, one of which is from the affective cluster. So the name of chapter is depressive disorder. At DSM-5 it is major depressive disorder, and ICD-11 it is single episode depressive disorder. Diagnostic criteria is for ICD-10 are three major criteria: depressed mood, loss of interest, and fatigability. And in DSM-5, 5 or more of the 9 symptoms should be present, with at least one being depressed mood or loss of interest. And in ICD-11, depressed mood or loss of interest in daily activities. Duration is 2 weeks for all three of them. Severity is subjective in ICD-11, whereas we determine by the number of symptoms present in both ICD-10 and DSM-5. And symptom specifier is somatic syndrome in ICD-10 with or without somatic syndrome and with or without psychotic symptoms. In DSM and ICD-11, there are no somatic syndrome, and psychotic features are included. So the criteria for ICD-10 is depressed mood, loss of interest, and reduced energy, which are three major criteria, and 7 other minor criteria: reduced concentration and attention, reduced self-esteem and self-confidence, ideas of guilt and unworthiness, bleak and pessimistic views of the future, ideas or acts of self-harm or suicide, disturbed sleep, and diminished appetite. For DSM-5, 5 or more should be present out of these 9 symptoms. And for ICD-11, depressive episode is characterized by a period of almost daily depressed mood or diminished interest in activities lasting at least 2 weeks, accompanied by other symptoms such as difficulty concentrating, feelings of worthlessness, or excessive and inappropriate guilt, hopelessness, recurrent thoughts of death or suicide, changes in appetite or sleep, psychomotor agitation or retardation, and reduced energy or fatigue. And for recurrent depressive disorder, in ICD-10, 2 episodes should be separated by several months without significant mood disturbances. For DSM-5, there is an interval of at least 2 consecutive months between separate episodes. And for ICD-11, it is called recurrent if history of at least 2 episodes separated by at least several months is present without significant mood disturbances. Now, personality disorders and related traits. The previous ICD-10 subtypes of personality disorders have been omitted. The ICD-11 asks the clinician to first determine whether the individual's clinical presentation meets the general diagnostic requirements for personality disorder. The clinician then determines whether a diagnosis of mild, moderate, or severe personality disorder is appropriate. So the personality disorders may be described further by indicating the presence of a characteristic maladaptive personality trait. 5 trait domains that represent a set of dimensions that correspond to the underlying structure of personality traits are included. First is negative affectivity, that is the tendency to manifest distressing emotions. Detachment, the tendency to maintain emotional and interpersonal distance. Dissociality, the tendency to disregard social conventions and the rights of the others. Disinhibition, the tendency to act impulsively, and anancastia, the tendency to control one's own and others' behavior. So in ICD-11, the chapter is called Personality Disorders and Related Traits. And personality disorder is classified as mild, moderate, severe, and unspecified. And the personality traits are used as a subspecifier. In ICD-10, the chapter is called Disorders of Adult Personality and Behavior and Specific Personality Disorders, which includes paranoid personality disorder, schizoid personality disorder, dissocial personality disorder, emotionally unstable personality disorder, histrionic, anancastic, anxious, and dependent personality disorders. And for DSM-5, they are divided into clusters as cluster A, cluster B, and cluster C. The neurodevelopmental disorders. ICD-11 uses the term intellectual developmental disorders to indicate that these are disorders that involve impaired brain function early in life. These are described in ICD-11 as a meta syndrome occurring in the developmental period analogous to dementia or neurocognitive disorder later in life. There are 4 subtypes: mild, moderate, severe, and profound. So all of these disorders are clubbed in ICD-10 under 3 major categories of mental retardation, disorders of psychological development, behavioral and emotional disorders with onset usually occurring in childhood and adolescence, and they are called neurodevelopmental disorders in both DSM and ICD-11. So this includes in ICD-10, it includes mental retardation, specific developmental disorders of speech and language, specific developmental disorders of scholastic skill, pervasive developmental disorders, and hyperkinetic tic or conduct disorders. And DSM-5, it includes autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, specific learning disorder, motor disorders, and tic disorders. In ICD-11, it includes disorders of intellectual development, autism spectrum disorder, developmental speech or language disorder, developmental learning disorder, developmental motor coordination disorder, ADHD, serotonin disorder, and other developmental disorders. Now, obsessive compulsive disorders. The duration criteria is removed in ICD-11 and DSM-5 in comparison to 2 weeks in ICD-10. The co-occurrence of schizophrenia or depression together with obsessive compulsive disorder is permitted in ICD-11. Hypochondriasis was moved from ICD-10's grouping of somatoform disorders to the ICD-11 grouping of obsessive compulsive and related disorders. And similarly, trichotillomania was moved from ICD-10 of habit and impulsive disorders to the ICD-11 grouping of obsessive compulsive and related disorders. In ICD-10, it includes the subtypes are predominantly obsessional thoughts or ruminations, predominantly compulsive acts, mixed obsessional thoughts and acts, other obsessive compulsive disorders, and obsessive compulsive disorder unspecified. In DSM-5, they're classified on the basis of insight, then body dysmorphic disorder, hoarding disorder, trichotillomania, excoriation disorder, substance or medication-induced disorders, and due to another medical condition. In ICD-11, they are again classified on the basis of insight, and it also includes body dysmorphic disorder, olfactory reference disorder, hypochondriasis, hoarding disorder, and body focus repetitive behavior disorders, which includes trichotillomania. Duration is 2 weeks for ICD-10, and it is not specific for DSM-5 and ICD-11. Now, neurocognitive disorders. ICD-11 neurocognitive disorders are acquired conditions characterized by primary clinical deficits in cognitive functioning and include conditions that are classified among ICD-10 as organic, including symptomatic mental disorders. So the name of chapter in ICD-10 is organic, including symptomatic mental disorders, and in DSM-5 and ICD-11 it is neurocognitive disorder. Subtypes in ICD-10 are dementia, organic amnesic syndrome, not induced by alcohol and other psychoactive substances, delirium, not induced by alcohol and other psychoactive substances, other mental disorders due to brain damage and dysfunction and due to physical disease, and personality and behavioral disorder due to brain disease, damage, and dysfunction. In DSM-5, it includes delirium and major and mild neurocognitive disorders. And ICD-11, dementia is a separate block. And in ICD-10, the duration is 6 months, and it is not specified for DSM-5 and ICD-11. Thank you for using your references.
Clarification. Very good. Category that which has been worse than necessary. Types के हिसाब से करते types से particularly I think can give okay, can you if suppose can you make a diagnosis that does not fulfill the criteria? Can you give suppose it does not fulfill the criteria? You're suspecting it does not fulfill because you think that maybe I am not able to it does not fulfill the criteria. You can, these are guidelines. Okay, these are not like you can't do that. No problem. प्रॉब्लम तो ये है नहीं अगर तुमको लगता है उसको कोई मेंटल डिसऑर्डर तो अनस्पेसिफाइड काम लेकिन starting from a chronic like usually I describe like something suffering from a chronic psychiatric condition या from psychiatric condition that affects the कर सकते हैं without meaning of का नाम DSM का फुल फॉर्म क्या है
Diagnostic and statistical manual.
No. Diagnosis statistical manual.
So, because of over the years, they have kept this statistical data to sir from different.
DSM कौन निकालता है
So, DSM sir, American Psychiatric Association. Yes, sir.
ICD
World Health Organization.
बेसिक डिफरेंस एक तो ये है इधर ICD कोड इज देयर और हम लोग जैसे ICD के ICD हमारे हॉस्पिटल में फॉलो होता है क्या हम DSM फॉलो कर सकते हैं नहीं कर सकते। उसका सबसे बड़ा कारण ये है कि डीएसएम इज ओनली फॉर साइकियाट्री। आईसीडी में सब डिजीज का कैटेगरी है, आप देखो इन्फेक्शन का भी कैटेगरी है, ओके, उसमें माइग्रेन का भी कैटेगरी है, उसमें इसको एवरीथिंग इंटरनेशनल क्लासिफिकेशन ऑफ डिजीज, so all the diseases are classified and they are given a code, so that so all the hospitals they follow ICD, because cardiac issues also you can give an ICD code, for gynae also you can give an ICD code, but साइकियाट्री का सबसे लंबा चैप्टर इसीलिए क्यों है, क्योंकि लाइक वी हैव पहले जैसे डिसऑर्डर्स होते थे, फॉर एग्जांपल जॉन्डिस, एनीमिया, विदाउट क्लिनिकल फाइंडिंग, infections. Earlier on, all these disorders were described on their signs and symptoms. Okay, slowly with time, we found out the etiology of these disorders. पहले तो उसने वो जैक, उसने सिर्फ कोलेरा को उसने मैप पे देखा और फिर देखा कि वेल से है तो ये वायरल इंफेक्शन वाटर बॉर्न, मलेरिया, बैड एयर, उसमें etiology एयर समझ जाती है कि swamps के अराउंड होता है, but slowly with time with scientific advances, we have been able to find the etiology of all these disorders. And so their diagnostic categories have come smaller and smaller. तो कोविड के लिए हमको एक्सप्लेन नहीं करना पड़ता कि यूजिंग होगी, ये होगा वो होगा, बस ये कि जो है डेंगू है तो एनएसवन पॉजिटिव है, ये है, ठीक है। ऐसे ही माइकार्डियल इंफार्क्शन और डिसऑर्डर्स के स्पेसिफिक हमारे में etiology नहीं पता, बट द अप्रोच इज सेम। पहले भी लोग ऐसे ही करते कि जो सिमिलर साइन सिम्टम्स से आपने एक बीमारी को डिस्क्राइब किया, एंड देन विद टाइम यू फाउंड दैट दैट वाज अ सिंगल सिंड्रोम और डिफरेंट। फॉर एग्जांपल जॉन्डिस वाज वन, बट देन दे लेटर ऑन फाउंड आउट इट वाज ऑब्स्ट्रक्टिव और इट वाज अदरवाइज ओके, है ना। तो दैट वे दे डिस्क्राइब की एटियोलॉजी से भी पता चला कि ये एक ही डिसऑर्डर नहीं, अलग अलग में भी एक ही नहीं, अलग अलग। तो सिमिलरली वी डोंट, जैसे कोविड है तो एक और उसकी क्लिनिकल प्रेजेंटेशन कितने अलग अलग, फ्रॉम डेथ टू सब क्लिनिकल इन्फेक्शन, इतना वाइड वैरायटी है। अगर कोई सिर्फ साइन एंड सिम्टम्स उसको क्लासिफाई करता है तो माइल्ड मॉडरेट सीवियर कोविड, और हो सकता है कि कोविड के बहुत से सब टाइप्स निकल पाए, पर एक ही है। डोंट नो देयर इज ओनली वन स्किज़ोफ्रेनिया, देयर आर मेनी डिफरेंट etiologies, or there is only one etiology, same for depression, same for anxiety disorders. So we are still stuck at a state where we are describing disorders by their signs and symptoms. That is the major problem. और हम लोगों के पास किसी भी डिसऑर्डर में कोई कॉन्क्रीट वो नहीं, टेस्ट नहीं। एक डिसऑर्डर था जो कि ऑर्गेनिक माना जाता था, ऑर्गेनिक ऑर्गेनिक डिसऑर्डर है डिमेंशिया या ऑर्गेनिक ब्रेन डिसऑर्डर्स, उसमें आपको पैथोलॉजी में कोई क्लियर कट चेंज दिखता है, उसमें भी हमारे पास कोई डायग्नोस्टिक होगी, सीटी स्कैन से डायग्नोस करने की ये पेशेंट डिमेंशिया या नहीं, उसमें भी हमको करना चाहिए। ओके, तो WHO has ICD, AP has DSM-5, AP is main income is from DSM-5, by selling DSM-5. The lawyers, the insurance company, they buy more of DSM-5 than the doctors. But with time, because of this scientific that is why AP maintain also different categories from ICD. Either ICD कर दें तो हमारी कमाई पास हो, तो उन्होंने बट विद लॉट ऑफ प्रेशर कि भाई ये तो लोग एंटी साइकेट्री डॉक्टर साइकेट्री नहीं, ये तो आप 10 लोग मिलते बैठते कहते कि भाई ये गैम्बलिंग डिसऑर्डर, आज से हमने गैम्बलिंग डिसऑर्डर, होमोसेक्सुअलिटी वाज अ डिसऑर्डर, तो फिर बाद में हुआ था कि नहीं होमोसेक्सुअल डिसऑर्डर, कौन बोल रहा है इसको, हम ही लोग बोल रहे हैं ये बिहेवियर नॉर्मल नहीं है, नॉर्मल है। दैट इज व्हाई देयर इज लॉट ऑफ ड्राइव आउट एंटी साइकेट्री, यू कैन हैव सम एविडेंस that this is a psychiatric disorder. So now they're bringing it together, but the validity is not in. एक जो है DSM-5 और ICD में कोरिलेशन करने के लिए they have tried this time and that is right. DSM 5 ICD, 11, they are now coming together. So we have similar criteria. Okay. Earlier on, some diagnoses are easier to make from one category. For example, from ICD, schizophrenia was a difficult diagnosis to make. Most of the time, अगर आप strictly follow करोगे psychosis and था DSM से क्योंकि type of hallucination delusion नहीं करने पड़ते हैं schizophrenia बनता है. वहीं पे ADHD जहाँ पे 6 out of 9 criteria meet करने होते हैं. अब ADHD DSM से बनाना बड़ा मुश्किल होता है. और क्योंकि ICD में ऐसा कुछ है नहीं फिक्स, ICD से आप ADHD थोड़ा इजीली बना सकते हैं. This is a lot of things, but we have to know. Why do we have to know? Because it may have proceed further. जैसे ये है, हम लोगों ने सब साइकेट्री में सबके पर्सनालिटी डिसऑर्डर्स के रटे हुए थे. ऐसे नॉचो क्राइटेरिया स्किज़ोटिपस वो कि अब ये आ गया नेगेटिव डायग्नोसिस इट मे बी फॉलो. मैम योर कमेंट्स.
This is becoming very आप पढ़ते गए मतलब ऐसा आप अगर थोड़ा एक्सप्लेन करते हैं मतलब खुद से ये ज्यादा इंटरेस्टिंग होता है. मतलब यू आर रीडिंग द स्लाइड, so that is not how you should go. You should talk and the slide should always be the point. The slide is okay, लेकिन आपको जब बोलते हो ना lecture should not be only from the
You have to engage the audience.
Otherwise it becomes monotonous and everybody is that is the conflict. इसके लिए इम्पोर्टेंट है कि चेंजेस वाले सब्जेक्ट्स में किए हैं और ये शॉर्ट नोट में एग्जैक्टली भी कुछ पेपर्स में देख. बट तो वो चीज मुझे समझ है कि इसमें तो क्या एक्सपेक्ट कर रहे हो इतना सारा तो कोई कैसे बात करके. तो मैंने इसी पर्पस से लिखा था कि शायद कुछ आएगा तो उसके बाद गाइड कर पाएंगे एग्जाम गोइंग बैच को कि जब भी एज शॉर्ट नोट आता है तो उसमें क्या क्या इन्हें लिखना है उसमें क्या एक्सपेक्ट किया जाएगा.
वैसे तो भाई क्वेश्चन सेटर्स को भी क्वालिफिकेशन होनी चाहिए. कई बार बहुत बेकार क्वेश्चन भी आते हैं, बट बेसिक थिंग इज इफ देयर लैंडमार्क शिफ्ट्स तो वो हमको पता है. जिसको जो इंडिया में कैटेगरी हटा दी है, ऑटिज्म में ऑटिज्म स्पेक्ट्रम डिसऑर्डर एक हो गया है, तो शॉर्ट नोट में अगर वो दो तीन पॉइंट पे अगर मेंशन कर दिए दो तीन सेलिएंट पॉइंट्स हैं, if they are they mention that, then I think that would be more than sufficient to get 5 में से 2-3 नंबर 3 नंबर.
इन्होंने फाइल ही पढ़ा मतलब तो मेरा बैच था हमने 4 ईयर पढ़ा था और एग्जाम में थोड़ी महीने पहले 5 आया तो फटफट याद कैसे चेंजेस है बेस आपने मुझे 3 कवर किया तो इसलिए आपको अच्छे से ये पढ़ना पड़ेगा बिकॉज अभी भी एग्जाम में पूछते हैं इवेंट इनके साथ हो गया नया है.
Good presentation. I think that it is a very boring topic. When you enlist the differences, it's boring. But how, like, I am also thinking now, maybe we could have given vignettes of cases and tried to diagnose according to the 3 categories. So the same vignette could have been diagnosed in 3 different ways. Maybe that way could have been a little bit more. Like, if you ask people to diagnose what is this case, and then we see according to the categories where this case will fall. So that would have been a little bit more interesting. And that is only one way. And yes, you were reading a little bit fast. Okay. Also see what the audience get. Okay. You included, I asked her to include the validity and the reliability point. So she included that. That is good. One concession I have to make. I have been telling all the residents not to use the word manic, but in the I found that it's everywhere in diagnostic. So we were like while describing a patient, we were always scolded if we said that this is a manic patient or diabetic. So it's because it gives stigma. We should not call a patient manic. Say that he's suffering from mania, or you should not say that he's diabetic, because that is an adjective. You can't change an adjective. Like I'm Indian, so I'm Indian. I can't do anything about it. No? So that is an adjective. So we should not use illnesses as an adjective. But episode, yeah, episode in current episode many that is there. That is some one mistake that I have been, I think, overdoing. So and there is, I think, there is no age to stop learning. So I also learned. I think Dr. Aditi pointed out that self-manic is given in ICD. It shouldn't be, but they are describing the episodes, so not the patient. You will see that in the textbook they don't describe the patient. They never describe manic patient or schizophrenic patient. Shouldn't be, because that patient is not described by his illness. You should not use illness as an adjective. That is the basic. Although we do, वैसे तो ये है कि कभी भी कोई कंफ्यूजिंग चीज आती है तो एंकर्स बोलते हैं दिस इज सो स्किज़ोफ्रेनिक, है ना। और मेनिया तो खैर सबको मेनिया, क्रिकेट मेनिया से लेकर मेनिया है ना? ठीक है, ओके।